Welcome back everyone. This is the last session of the first module. Before we begin this session, let's have a quick recap of the last session. In the last session, we majorly discussed the differences between the types of research: experimental, descriptive, historical, qualitative, quantitative, basic, applied, and what is the difference between a thesis, dissertation, research paper. We ended up by actually discussing a few terms and terminologies that you should be familiar with, like experiments, surveys, questionnaires, interviews, observation trials, Delphi methods. So I would suggest you to go through all the reading material that has been provided to you in this module and see whether you're able to connect well with the module. Now let's begin with the last session. In this session, we will be covering the few topics that are there. First one is the framing of a research title. Second is literature review. What is the purpose and importance of literature review? What are the parameters of literature review that one should know before critiquing it? And how should you summarize the literature review and finally synthesize it? Alright. Now, moving on to the next slide, framing of a title. So title is actually a building block of your research. The title of the research is important because it actually catches the eye of any researcher who wants to research further on that area of interest, and therefore your title should actually define your whole research in a very precise and a concise way. So supposing, like I said in the last example, if I wanted to know a relationship, supposing it's an experimental research and you want to know a relationship between a job performance and the causes may be the environment, the training that has been provided. So the title of the research, if it is the impact of training on the job performance, it gives us the clear idea, or the influence of training on the job performance. This is also one of the good titles which gives you the clear idea. Let's quickly see what are the do's and the don'ts of framing a title. So what you should keep in mind while you're framing your title is the title should always be very direct and very factual. It should be short and crisp, and if it's short and crisp, it obviously attracts the audience. It's eye capturing, and it should also be simple. Just avoid using a lot of jargons and words which you think that your audience is not familiar with. Follow the title case whenever you're writing a title. Use the keywords that you think are relevant in your interest area. So the keywords may be, supposing if you take the same example, if you want to know the relationship between job performance and environment, the keywords will be job performance or the work environment or the parameters of job performance. Use these technical keywords. What are the don'ts of framing a title? Avoid using any short forms or acronyms or shortened terms or chemical formula in the title. Do not make it very verbose. Do not pile on a lot of words in your title. Make it very short. Avoid using any complex words which you think that the audience will not understand. Do not italize or capitalize words unnecessarily. So these are the few key points that you should keep in mind while framing your title. Now let's move on to literature review. Quickly, what is a literature review? It's basically an in-depth understanding of everything that has been written or published before your study has been done. So supposing you've chosen a title, you want to know whether anything has been done previously in that area of interest, so you search on the keywords. Why do you do that? You do that because you want to understand what kind of research design you would want to implement in your research. What variables will you be taking? What will be the outcomes? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the similar researches that have been done in your area? What are the difficulties that were faced by similar researchers in the area? Finally, once you get all that, you summarize it and then you analyze all those researches. You find some very good and relevant models that are fitting in your research, maybe some very good and relevant articles that are there, some laws that have been come up, some amendments that are there, and you make a analysis out of it. Once you analyze everything, you conclude by finding the gaps in them. So if you have analyzed all the researches, all the literature that has been existing in your area, you conclude by saying, fine, these are all the relevant literatures, but there is still a gap that is existing and I want to fulfill that gap by doing my study. So this is basically the whole purpose of literature review. Let us now continue to the next slide, which is telling you how to go about it. What is the whole process? So you start, like I said, you start with the topic. You search the keywords from authentic database. This is very important. Do not use search engines like Google directly while searching for your relevant literature. These literature should be authentic. How do you know whether these literature are authentic? By using certain databases that are already existing. Like you can use ResearchGate, you can use Ebesco, you can use maybe database of Scopus or Emerald Publishers or similar authentic databases, like I said. Now, once you find the relevant literature in these databases, you analyze those literature. Once you analyze it, you synthesize it in the form of short summaries. Once you synthesize this, you'll be able to recognize some similar themes that are existing in those literature, and these themes will actually give you the gaps that are there. Once these gaps are identified, you formulate your hypothesis based on those gaps, and after that you finally write your review. Now let's move on to what are the parameters on which you can basically critique the existing literature. One of the parameters is the audience. Maybe previous studies have been written keeping in mind only the practitioners or the academicians in the field of law, and you want to actually write your study keeping in mind the audience, maybe everyone who can read it. So you will critique the similar studies, saying that the previous studies were based on the audience that were actually law professionals, practitioners, and there is a gap existing which says that you want to write more keeping the audience as the general public. The second parameter can be the purpose. Why did the author previously write those research articles? Example, maybe the authors wrote those articles just to review or to make amendments in some existing laws or bills. The third is the style of writing. Maybe the articles were written in APA style, maybe they were written in MLA style or Chicago style. The fourth parameter is the language. How well written the articles were, grammatically, how well the sentences were synchronized, whether the paragraphing was done well, the flow of the paragraphs were done well. So if all this is done well, it is actually called a form of academic writing, which is what we are actually learning in research methodology, how to academically write so that it is read well and it attracts everyone in your field. The last parameter we can say is the presentation. How visually appealing is your research article? What is the spacing of the words, the alignment of the sentences, whether you've used any graphs or diagrams or tables to represent it? Is it easier for the audience to read it, or is it making it very difficult? So these are some of the parameters on which you can critique the existing literatures. Now moving on to the next slide. This is a template that I've included which tells you how do you actually summarize all the literature. So you've searched the keywords, you get thousands of research papers, articles, white papers in that field. How do you actually make a template in a short form so that you're able to analyze it? This is how you can do it. You can include these columns: style, type of study, the research questions that are there in those studies, the research design, the sampling that has been done, the findings of those study, and finally your comments based on that paper. So for example, in the first row I've I can take an example of any research paper. Maybe it was written in APA 6 style. It was empirical in nature, which means the data was collected, it was in number, maybe questionnaires were used, the research question that was relevant. Since I can say, supposing the research question was they wanted to evaluate whether the child labourers who are in Madhya Pradesh are increasing in number with each year. So I'll try and collect the data similarly, and maybe I'll go directly to the child labourers, I'll ask them. So my sample would be all the child labourers who are homeless and living in Madhya Pradesh from the age group of 12 to 18. And whatever findings are there of my study, you write that in those columns in that study, and then you write the comments on that. Another example can be, it can be a review paper that you are actually seeing. Just write down these topics according to the paper, whether it has been written MLA, APA, Chicago, it's a review paper, it's an empirical, it's a theoretical paper, it has been used as a qualitative design or a quantitative design. What is the sample of that paper, what are the findings? Once you get all this, you'll be able to find similar kind of papers. You extract the themes of those papers in the form of the thematic analysis, and finally you will get the gaps. We'll be explaining a lot of about this in the further modules, but just to get a gist of how you prepare these templates, this is how you do it. Now moving on to the next slide, we've actually completed this module. We've given you a gist of everything that is required for you to know initially about research methodology. Why is research important? Why do you do this? How do you start on your research? How do you formulate a title of your research? And how do you search the keywords in the search engine? How do you actually extract the papers? Now, while actually extracting the papers from the databases, keep in mind that these papers have been cited well. So, just keep in mind that you are able to decide whether the papers are authentic or not. If they have been cited by a lot of people, it means that the papers are doing well in the research world, in the academic world, and you can actually cite them in your studies. If they haven't been cited well, check whether these researchers have been published in good authentic journals and good authentic publishers. You can check this by seeing their indexing, whether they are Scopus indexed, whether they are ABDC and Web of Science. So all these are indexing which you can see before downloading those papers and citing them in your research. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the module. I would advise everyone to go through all the reading material that has been provided, especially the pages that are mentioned here in the next slide. Once you go through the reading material, we've given you assignment based on the reading material and the module that have been taught in these last 4 sessions. Thank you so much. Hope to see you in the next module.